Waterbeach is the thriving new community that offers the best of lakeside living just minutes from Cambridge. With new cycle routes that take you to the Science Park in 25 minutes, Waterbeach is the perfect place for you to call home. New 2 and 3 bedroom flats and 3 and 4 bed houses from Carla and Stonebond are available now, with show homes open every day. No need to book an appointment, just drop in and discover how you could start your story at Waterbeach. For more information, please visit waterbeachwb.co.uk or email hello@waterbeachwb.co.uk. Welcome to the Cambridge Tech Podcast, talking all things technology from the heart of the UK's tech capital. Here are your hosts, Faye Holland and James Parton.
Hi, I'm James and welcome to Cambridge Tech Podcast. Let's open with news of 2 local fundraisers. First, Cambridge-based Clock Bio, a lifespan biotech, are working to reverse aging, and they have raised $5.3 million in a seed round led by local Globe, with participation from Blue Yard Capital, On-Site Ventures, and serial Cambridge life science entrepreneur, Dr. Jonathan Milner. The company has made significant progress in decoding the biology of human rejuvenation, identifying more than 100 genes that jointly constitute an atlas of rejuvenation factors. Next is Neutrino, a pioneering deep tech startup spinning out of the University of Cambridge. They have secured a $5 million seed round from a global syndicate of mission-aligned investors to target the $130 trillion decarbonisation market. On average, companies have over 90% of emissions in their value chain, and 93% will fail to achieve their net zero goals unless they double the pace of emission reduction by 2030. Neutrino significantly minimizes the primary data burden on suppliers and allows enterprises to map product lines faster and automatically pinpoint solutions that reduce emissions and costs across thousands of suppliers. So congratulations to both of them for their fundraisers. Keeping on the theme of climate tech, let's move on to this week's interview. We meet Nicky Dee, who is the co-founder of climate accelerator Carbon13.
Nicky, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't we start with getting to know you a little bit better? Could you give us a flavour of your background and your journey to Carbon13?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a scientist originally, and I then somewhat accidentally did a PhD at the University of Cambridge. And just before starting that, I came across this wonderful world of entrepreneurship and started engaging with people around ICT and biotech, and came up with the crazy idea of looking at ventures with environmental technologies. During the course of the PhD, the term clean tech arose, and now, of course, we've got the term climate tech. So sometimes I say to people I was in climate tech before it was called climate tech. But yes, from academia, I found some frustrations with the path to impact. And so I left academia after a short postdoc, and I've been working with entrepreneurs and people wanting to innovate the intersection between sustainability and innovation for over 20 years.
How did you accidentally do a PhD? I can't let that one go.
I actually said to someone during my undergraduate, I said, if I ever do a PhD, please have a strong word. And I wanted to do a master's in environmental technology. And it turns out in Cambridge that when you start applying for funding for a year of, I think it was an MPhil, I had to apply for a PhD and then downgrade. And I managed to get the funding. And I thought, well, I may as well do the PhD.
Well, there you go. It's good a reason as any.
Where did the spark for the interest in entrepreneurship come from?
You see, this is the point where my life seems like a series of accidents, which is partly true. I had a year out after doing my undergraduate where I rejected the notion of going to work for McKinsey or PwC and instead I did marine research in the Philippines. And I came back after 6 months of doing that, and I didn't have any money. So I did some temping. And through the temping, I ended up working at the Cambridge Entrepreneurship Centre, which is the first time I really came across entrepreneurship. So with Peter Hiscock, Shai Vayakarnam, Shirley Jameson, Tim Minchell, very formative time. And they said they quite liked my approach and asked me to stick around.
And there's another name, blast from the past, Shirley Jameson.
Yeah.
She's actually working on a project at the moment with the University of Cambridge on interviewing female entrepreneurs about their journey.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. I think it's closed by the time this one goes live, so I don't think we can recruit any more people for that. Anyway, back onto the topic. It was interesting in that introduction how you were saying how the nomenclature's changed. So climate tech, net zero, green tech, clean tech. There's so many of them. And actually, over the last few months here on the podcast, we've talked through much more of that area than I think we have done, in the previous 18 months. So let's move on and talk a little bit then about Carbon13. What was the origin of it? How did it come about? And what gap were you intending to fill?
In Cambridge, I'd been somewhat frustrated that the narrative was very much dictated by the value of companies in financial terms and not actually what they were doing. And around 2017-18, I'd found this group, and it was tech people in Cambridge thinking about climate, thinking about the environment. And I remember seeing this group discussion, people from ARM, people from Autonomy and various other companies saying we should really be doing more in this. And I couldn't have agreed more with that statement. And then simultaneously, I'd been thinking about all the work I'd done, working with entrepreneurs who are very purpose-driven, and great ideas, great intent, but really struggling to scale up. So Carbon13 is a response to both of those things. One is saying, okay, we've got these incredible people in Cambridge. They should really be focusing on some of the biggest challenges that we're facing. But secondly, thinking about some of the challenges I'd seen individual entrepreneurs experiencing, and one of them was around team. So if we could help people actually create the right teams, could that help them scale up? Secondly, impact, really putting that at the heart of what they're doing, and not just impact from a nice, we want to do nice things, wouldn't that be a good thing to do? But tying impact to a value proposition that could really drive that scaling up.
So what was the reaction from the investment community, when you put forward the proposition for Carbon13? Had maybe a bad pun, had the light bulb gone on, for the investment community, they needed to put funds into this area? Or did you really have to kind of take that burden of education and really explain why this was important?
How long have we got? So I'm sorry to say that Cambridge has not really led the way in this area. So the financial backing hasn't really come from Cambridge. Luckily, we've got connections elsewhere. We set up in Berlin last year, and that's partly because the investment community in Europe seems to be much more switched on to this agenda. I also think the world of investment has shifted a little bit. So fortunately, we're no longer tied in terms of proximity geographically. So for our entrepreneurs, they don't have to have an investor just down the road. But yeah, we had some lucky money up front. And since then, the investors that have come in, we've been able to leverage SEIS in the UK, which is a fantastic scheme. And then we also have an LP fund.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the SEIS scheme. That's hard to say, isn't it? Because you're actually reaching out direct then to individual investors to come in on the fund. That must be quite an interesting undertaking. How do you do the marketing of that and the education around that? Because obviously when you look at your website, it's very upfront about the risks associated with that kind of investment. So what's it like balancing institutional investors and retail investors?
Yeah, so SEIS is obviously for individuals, and there's various advantages. And as you've rightly said, there are risk warnings. We have to be really compliant on that front and make sure that we're talking to the right people in the right way. But yeah, it's an amazing scheme. And what it's allowed us to do is essentially have micro funds attached to our cohorts. And that's allowed us to demonstrate a track record. So how we make investment decisions, what our investment strategy is. And that's what's really created a pathway to being able to do a bigger fund.
So how much have you raised to date? And you're looking for a bigger fund. When's that going to happen?
So I think we've deployed around 8 million to date. And with the fund, I think probably the easiest thing is let's have a catch up on it in a few months' time.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the money up front, but actually it's about the impact, right? It's the impact of the ventures. So why don't we switch gears then and talk about, the portfolio of companies now that you've put together. How long has the program been running, and are you starting to see some of those impacts coming through?
Yeah, so we started off programs actually at the end of COVID. So that was Easter 2021. We did our first investments in September 21. And we now have a portfolio of over 70 companies, and we're about to make another round of investments. So it's quite a nice portfolio number, and we're known to be a very active investor in this space and some catalytic capital. So sometimes we invest when others just don't. We run things on a program basis. We started off with something called a venture builder, so literally creating these companies. And partly as a result of existing companies coming to us and saying, how do we tap into that? Because we want to know, how are you talking about impact? How do we engage with your community as well as access the finance, was why we started up something called the launchpad. And then we opened up in Berlin last year. Like financial returns, we end up in a similar problem with impact. That first off, you have to do quite a lot of development before you actually start creating that impact. We put each of our entrepreneurs through training. We don't think it's appropriate to outsource impact. So in the same way we want our entrepreneurs to be managing their finances, we also want them to be custodians of their impact. But the upside of that is it offers a new perspective when they're going through ideation. It offers a new perspective when they're looking at commercial drivers and value propositions, and being able to innovate on different business models. So I don't think that we are anywhere close to where we intend to be on impact. And I expect that some of those impacts will come in a few years' time in a similar way to financial returns. However, if you look across the board, so I can give you some financial metrics, but we have the likes of Blue Methane, who remove methane from water. They've just shipped off in a shipping container something they've dubbed as Harvey, which is their first unit to go off and actually be removing methane from water. We have, so many ventures in the portfolio now. We have Kita, who have launched their insurance product. So that's the first carbon insurer, to help try and boost the integrity of carbon credits, but certainly provide insurance if they don't perform as expected. So yeah, a number of interesting things. Materials Nexus, which is a very Cambridge story. They've had a breakthrough in producing a magnet. So some good things happening in the portfolio.
And these ventures are coming from all around the world, is that right? You obviously Carbon13 started in Cambridge, but you're now accepting applications from anywhere.
To some extent. There are some jurisdictions that we can't play in. And Cambridge anyway is quite a diverse place. Yeah. And we have, I think, typically around 30 different nationalities on a program, whether it's Cambridge or Berlin. Mm-hmm. Now we have some of our first Berlin-Cambridge teams, hybrid teams, which is nice. And yeah, I think for us, we think about it as a hub. So Cambridge is a place that people like. They want to go and visit Cambridge, and it's relatively easy to get to. You just hop on a train from London. Similarly, Berlin is a great hub. It's a place that people want to get to.
Is Berlin the first of other international city expansions, or was it purely the fact that the capital was there that was interested in supporting the goals of Carbon13?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think we really felt some constraints. I hate to say the Brexit word, but I'm going to say the Brexit word for talent, but also for markets. Obviously, one of our great playgrounds is on our doorstep, and we felt that we needed a footprint there. But then there's a very pragmatic side of it. So my co-founder, Michael, he's German, and it was very easy for him to relocate to Berlin. But yeah, coming on to other locations, I think we've got various different opportunities going ahead. A different location might be one, and we've certainly had those discussions, but there are other things we'd like to explore as well.
So the venture builders themselves, they're 8 months of program. What do you take people through? You said some of it was around building the team, so you can tick that first frustration that you saw yourself. What happens during that process?
Well, it's an art, not a science. So we don't curate the teams. It's a very interesting process, and we're about to kick off another program in Cambridge and another one in Berlin, so the end of next week. A lot of the hard work actually happens before the program starts, so we need to make sure that we've got the right people in the room. And we have this wonderful moment when people turn up and they feel like kids in a sweet shop because they're just surrounded by incredible talent, people with depths of skills and connections and insights, and everybody really pulling in the same direction. They have a real commitment to doing something in this space. And part of what we do is make sure that people talk to everybody, not just people that are like themselves. We have to take them through what is a good team, how do you build in teaming practices, and it's a lot of fun. It's crazy. It's really intense. And as part of this, we start peppering, how do you actually ideate? How do you think about impact? And how does that allow you to have different types of conversations? When we're recruiting people up front, we're looking for that experience, but we also look for a couple of other things. One of them is commitment. One of them is self-awareness. And the other one is the willingness to team. So slightly different qualities to what you might think. And one of the analogies I know someone's made is it's Love Island for climate tech.
Okay.
We'll leave that mental image hanging there. So the application process, walk us through that in terms of, the criteria, the process. Are you always oversubscribed? How heavily do you have to market the programs? What's the story there?
We have a remarkable process. And look, Carbon13 has a phenomenal team. We've been at this for a little while now. As an indicator, when we went out to Germany for the first time, we didn't have to double our marketing budget. It remained the same. And that was based on the power of word of mouth and referrals and the fact that our founders had been making some noise. So, yeah, I'm not going to give away all of our secrets. But yeah, we've got a process that's working really well, and we keep beating our record. So we've just beaten our record again for the number of applicants coming to the program. And we now have a waiting list of people wanting to come onto our programs.
And it sounds like because you're like matchmaking as well, are a lot of applicants then they've probably just got an idea, need a business founder or a technical founder so they're kind of pre-company formation, they're very early stage, is that right?
Yeah, extremely early. So typically in a cohort of around 80 people, around half of them will be commercial, half will be technical in the broadest sense. We also have wildcards within that, people with slightly unconventional backgrounds. But yeah, we find that the number of people that you take in is important. We've tried with 100 and you just have too many people and they're not mixing properly. If you have fewer than that number, there are also challenges in choice. So we think around 80 is the right number.
I think one thing reading up on Carbon13, you're quite strict, if you like, on who comes into those cohorts. So I know that you focus on certain areas like built environment, energy, food, materials, new build, platform and transport. Do you think that helps you, that you are quite constrained, if you like, on who you take in? Does that give you added focus?
So a critique we used to have was actually the opposite, that we weren't focused enough, because part of what we're doing is We're saying we don't care what sector you're in. As long as you think you can create impact, then we want to talk to you. And we're also aware that to get real transformation, some of these ideas really bridge 2 or sometimes 3 different industries. And that's really exciting for us. I think that's, and again, some platform plays within it. Yeah, on our Venture Builder program, we don't have a theme as such, which we recruit around. We sometimes shift the balance. So we'll say we're looking to build out a bit more on AI or data skill sets, or we're looking to build out a bit more on process engineering or some other, scientific domains that we want to push on. The place where we really get to play with themes at the moment is on the launchpad. And again, the themes have been quite broad. I think you always have to be a bit careful because you don't want to close down innovation and what you're looking for. So even if we do a theme in the launchpad, we always make sure that around a quarter or a third of it is for crazy ideas.
So you matchmake the teams, they go through the 8-month program. Is there like a demo day kind of concept at the end where, investors will then potentially write their first checks? Or if you're the first check, their second, third checks?
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to lay a pathway so that these ventures can scale. And we're actually, when you look at it, even though we're a really critical part of that process, we're a very small part of it. So we're there for the first year, effectively. And what we're looking for is we're looking for teams that can go beyond that first check. And we prep them for that. So they have to do a full data room, all the documentation, everything that you would expect. Obviously, they have to be able to stand up to scrutiny and questions. So the successful teams are ones who are, yes, they're sort of thinking, we want to secure that first check, but they're thinking, and once we've done that, we want to do this, we want to do that and the other. Always, I think what would be a red flag for us is if someone treats it almost like a competition. They go, once we've got that first check, we're done. So yeah, this is very much about scaling up. And if I look at one of the ventures that's had a very quick scaling journey, it's a company called Cocoon Carbon, again, with a Cambridge link. And that's a mixture of carbon removal, but also carbon avoidance in cement industry. So what that means for us from a financial returns perspective, or an indication of, is that we have a multiple on invested capital of 4.92, which is a really nice story to be able to tell. And yeah, we're watching that team with interest, but I think probably the alarm bells for Cambridge is they're no longer based in Cambridge. They have moved to the US.
Because I was going to lead on to that one. How many, at the top of the episode, I was talking about how our conversation on the podcast has increased in this area. And I'll look through some of the list of your portfolio, and you've got Sunbear, Bravely Cultured, Niam, Materials Nexus, I think, that are all kind of emanating out of Cambridge. Do you think we're getting enough entrepreneurship in the climate tech space coming out?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we are collaborating with the Cambridge ecosystem. Materials Nexus is an example of one where we were actually the first investor, but then Cambridge Enterprise came in later. What I pick up, because we try and support some other activities with the likes of Cambridge Zero, that there is a lot of interest in this space. I know there's been some criticism of the university that it's not taking enough of a deliberate approach towards really building in impact and purpose into research and then trying to disseminate some of that. And I think some of that criticism is probably valid. If we look at other places in the world, I don't think that Cambridge is really standing out as the climate tech hub.
That's going to be my next question, actually. I mean, you talked at the beginning of the conversation about the challenge of raising capital from Cambridge. Mm-hmm. Is there development and growth in that area? Not necessarily on the capital side, but, obviously I know you're a fellow at CISL, and Canopy is recently launched with a climate tech focus for their workspace. Eagle Labs has relaunched with a climate tech focus, and I think you're based there, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, are these important developments? Do you think it's, now on people's agenda, or do you still think Cambridge is lagging?
Well, you have to put that within the context of what everybody else is doing. And, as I said, I've been in this space for a long time and it's brilliant. Sometimes people say, you're frustrated that suddenly stuff is happening. I'm like, we've left it late, really late, but I actually think it's brilliant. People are wanting to look at solutions, they're wanting to buy. We've got opportunists coming into this space, and that's a really good thing because it means we can get stuff done. But yeah, I think that's happening across the board. We look at the targets that companies are setting for themselves, and no company has a plan of how they're actually going to achieve that target. Exactly the same for governments. We had the IEA recently do an update on a report they'd done on how much innovation we need in this space to hit net zero. And they said that we're still under by 35%. So we need innovation to really top up being able to achieve some of those figures. So we're going to miss the targets otherwise by 35%. So yeah, when I look at the wider context and what everybody else is doing, yes, we see more in Cambridge, but we see more going on absolutely everywhere at the moment. So I don't see Cambridge doing any more than anywhere else.
Are there any particular kind of centres of excellence that you'd call out internationally?
So I think Berlin is an interesting spot. One of the great shifts that we've seen is in America. They've gone from being, frankly, behind the agenda to introducing the IRA and a huge amount of economic incentive to actually get things done in this space. So that's really prompted quite a lot of people to look at that as a market opportunity, but also we know that the investors in the US are, conviction capital. They can make stuff happen quickly. We also have some backers from Southeast Asia, which is quite an interesting thing that's happened. Yeah, and I look at, again, coming back to the investment, and Cambridge still has a fantastic presence around the world. We have some phenomenal people here, and it's not just in the university, it's also the wider ecosystem. And we do, we're based at the Eagle Labs. They had a green retrofit, which Barclays did, which was fantastic. We know that Cambridge Clean Tech, they've been active for a while and we talk to them frequently. Cambridge Zero, Emily Shuckborough's group, that's finally been a way to convene a lot of the research in this space at the university. If you look at things on a global level, Cambridge needs to be doing more.
Is there a specific call that you could make that said, if we could just do this one thing in the next X amount of time, what would that be?
I mean, it's always stories, right? And we need some great stories. And entrepreneurship is a wonderful way of getting some of these stories. I think my concern at the moment is some of the stories that we could have actually have a very short life in Cambridge, and the most exciting part of the story ends up happening elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, the point you made about obviously companies having to leave, to the States to scale. Scaling has cropped up a number of times, hasn't it, in the conversation, and it loomed large in Cambridge Tech Week as well. So it's definitely a major issue that the UK needs to address.
Yeah, and it's not just Cambridge. I mean, the UK, as I said, SEIS and EIS are great schemes. The investment space in Europe, you have something called the Sustainable Finance Disclosures Regulation, which is looking at people bringing impact into their fund and how you really track that. And the FCA was quite behind over here. We also know, there's been a lot of shifts over here, and I think everybody is curious to see what that means for investment in the UK as a whole.
So, Nicky, that's a really interesting conversation and thought-provoking as well. There's clearly some issues to tackle. If a budding entrepreneur is listening to this, wants to get involved, wants to form a startup, wants to form a team, how do they get in touch?
If they're looking for a team, they apply to the Venture Builder program. They can either do that in Cambridge or Berlin. All information at carbon13 with the 13 spelt.com. If they're an existing team looking for support, then they apply to something called the launchpad. But yeah, the next Builder program will be starting around Easter 2025. So get your application in early.
Great. Lovely to talk to you.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Today's show was produced by Carl Homer of Cambridge TV and supported by our media partner, Business Weekly. The Cambridge Tech Podcast is available on all major podcast platforms and on cambridgetechpodcast.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. It'll really help others discover the show.